Let me say that I grew up in New Mexico, and as a child, we made lots of visits to the surrounding tourist sites and ancient sites in the state of New Mexico and Colorado and Arizona. So that's an early childhood memory that's instilled in me, and I think it instilled in me an interest in ancient cultures and the ruins that they have left behind. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 10 years, and during those 10 years in Saudi Arabia, every opportunity I had to get out of the kingdom, I took it. And I frequently went to some place like Turkey or Greece or Egypt or Italy, and tromped through a lot of ancient ruins. So it's something that's kind of in my blood. And even though I grew up in New Mexico, I had never visited Chaco Canyon, but that makes sense because it wasn't the national park until 1980. Prior to that time, it was open only to archaeological researchers. So it's late to the national park system, but it's a place that's always been on my bucket list, along with Machu Picchu and a lot of places that are much more difficult to get to. So finally, in 2018, late in the year 2018, I was able to realize, I was able to cross that off my bucket list, and I made a visit there, and I was not disappointed. I was very inspired by the place. What I can say, I learned a lot about the Anasazi then, and in numerous books that I've read about them since then. Chaco Canyon, which you see here in this painting, this is one of several great houses that were built in this canyon in the years between 850 and about 1130. And then mysteriously, by about the year 1250, this building had been abandoned. And so I was so inspired by this that I kind of came back with a resolve to build my next show based on that, based on what I saw there, what I read and learned about them. And so I started painting in about the middle of 2019. I started putting the show together, and this was one of the first paintings that I painted. And I painted this and a few of the other specifically Chaco-inspired paintings. And then I began to think that maybe that was too narrow a focus, that an entire show built just on those architectural, built in those edifices, that it might be a too narrow a focus. So I resolved to broaden my the theme of my show and just focus in general on the state of New Mexico and the state of and the general Southwest region. And so I started painting, doing paintings, and when I thought about the landscape of the region, I resolved also that I didn't want to paint the landscape literally. I wanted to paint an impression or an understanding or an emotional attachment or realization about the landscape of my home state and of that region of the country in general. And when I thought about the landscape, what I think of it is that it's broad and it's generally wide and horizontal. And as we stand there in that landscape, it unfolds before us in consecutive waves, whether we're on the flatland or whether we're in the mountains. Even if you're in the mountains, you see the jagged lines. and they repeat over and over and over again. So I wanted to find some abstract, somewhat reductive way to kind of capture that. So I relied on line, shape, and color a lot to make those representations. And then I got several paintings under my belt in that regard. And then the painting, the pandemic, we went into pandemic lockdown, as you will remember, and nobody could go anywhere, and we were essentially confined to our homes. I felt some stutter, I can't think of the exact word here, but I felt I faltered a bit in my inspiration that I had built. So I decided to just push myself, just paint anyway, no matter what you are feeling, just paint anyway. Well, that was a terrible decision because all I did was produce 2 or 3, really ugly paintings. So I stopped and I thought, I've got to do something to kind of reignite, the flame, so to speak. So when I thought about it, I thought, I'd really like to do is I'd like to do something really, really small, sitting at my desk, something very small and very detailed. And so I started to create those collages that you see behind you there. And I had a wonderful experience in doing those because, as I said, I was just doing something sitting at my desk and playing with all these little stones and touching the papers and moving the papers around, and all of the papers are hand printed or hand colored by me, the ones that aren't found or cut out of a magazine. So it was a regenerative kind of experience to make those, and I think the tactile portion of that, the playing with the stones and the playing with the papers and touching them and feeling of those things kind of jogged my senses a little bit, and I was able to then pick up from that point and go forward. Hang on a second, I've got to check my notes here. I wrestled also with the title because when I had started at the beginning and I was really focused on Chaco Canyon, I had a different working title, which I couldn't even tell you to now, I don't remember what it was. But I tried to think of a title that was as broad in its application to the American Southwest as I had decided my focus would be. And I got to thinking about it, and I thought about color and the richness of color that one sees in the American Southwest. And there's also the color in the land, but frequently the color in the land is somewhat subtle. But if we draw on the cultural background, the Hispanic and Indian cultures there, there's a lot of richness of color there. And certainly when one thinks about colors, if you're just thinking abstractly about colors in the American Southwest and somebody asks you to rattle off, some colors that come to mind, you're going to talk about all the colors of the earth, and the things that are, one would rather expect to hear. But somewhere, eventually, you will always mention turquoise. You will always say that because it is so endemic. As I looked in my reading and the research that I did, and even researching, the Chaco culture, one of their principal one of the principal items that they traded, in addition to seashells and feathers and a lot of other trinkets, was turquoise. So it has a historical significance. And it's treasured, you know, as something, you know, worth owning. And whether we see it actually as the actual stone, or whether we see it as it is ubiquitously applied everywhere you go, you know, just as a pigment even, that color is there. So that's kind of the roundabout journey that brought me, you know, to this exhibition. It's again, the title is Colors of a Place, and I want to close with this poem that I found. And one of the things that I do frequently also when I'm painting is I read poetry. Because, you know, poetry is so imbued with suggestion and nuance and kind of feeling statements that it's helpful. This is a painting by a guy named Odell Shelburne. The title is A Painter's Mixed Results. He says, I blend ochre and burnt umber, search for shades of brown to paint this desert scape. Scrape the makeshift palette and hear the styrofoam sing lush tones as pale streaks take on deeper hues. I study bursts of light and shade, gaze into shimmers of heat as an aging sun blisters the sky and prepares to flood the desert in baths of blood before the darkness descends. I mix sienna and sand, wonder how to fix this image, how to show what I see blooming in brown. I dabble in drab, stippled dunes with shadows and settle for the abstract memory. So that kind of summarized, when I read this poem, I was really taken by how much it, you know, kind of captured my experience and what I was trying to convey. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank my very supportive Archway colleagues, and if any of you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Anybody? Thank you all very much for coming out.